7 names were carved beneath the image of an open door. The memorial stood at the edge of Ridgefield, Oklahoma, where mobile homes had once crowded beneath a wide, unforgiving sky. Families came every spring. They left flowers, photographs, and small weather radios with the batteries removed. Among the names were Colin Tolland, Maeve's younger brother, and June Mercer, the woman who had pulled Maeve from the wreckage of another tornado more than 30 years earlier. Dry Creek County did not remember Maeve as the woman who had modernized its warning system, arranged buses for elderly residents, or helped open shelters across the county. They remembered one locked door. On the night 7 people died, Maeve was the county emergency management director. Updated storm data showed Ridgefield moving into the tornado's path. A school shelter could still have been reopened. An employee asked for authorization. Maeve's brother left a message, saying families had nowhere else to go. Maeve heard it. She understood what could happen, and she kept the shelter closed. Years later, a judge would say she had not been convicted because she failed to control a storm. No human being could do that. She was convicted because she controlled a door, knew who was outside it, and decided her authority mattered more than their safety. But long before Maeve held that power, she had been the child on the other side. She was 10 when her mother brought her and Colin to a church basement during a tornado warning. The man at the entrance said the shelter was full. Maeve could see empty spaces behind him, spaces being saved for families whose names carried weight in town. Her mother begged. The door stayed closed. Ruth Tolland did not survive that storm. Maeve did. For the rest of her life, she insisted no one should have the power to decide whose life was worth opening a door for. Then she took that power for herself. Understanding the child Maeve had been does not excuse the woman she became. Her pain explains why the door mattered. It does not erase what she chose when 7 lives depended on her. So what happened between those 2 storms? How did a frightened girl who lost her mother behind a locked door become the official who refused to open another one? The courtroom had no windows. Maeve Tolland sat beneath white fluorescent lights while the people of Dry Creek County filled the benches behind her. Some had traveled from Ridgefield. Others had come from towns she had once helped protect. They did not speak to her. They did not need to. For nearly 3 weeks, the trial had reduced her life to radio logs, weather maps, access records, and timestamps. The woman who had once stood at the center of every emergency briefing now had no authority over what happened next. She could not correct a witness. She could not redirect a question. She could not decide when a door opened or closed. The judge looked down at her and said the state had never argued that Maeve could control a tornado. No public official could promise that every life would be saved. But Maeve had been trusted with something smaller and more human, the responsibility to act when danger became clear. She had received the updated warning. She had been told the old-school shelter could still be opened. She had heard from the people waiting outside, and she had chosen not to move. The prosecutor rose to read the names. Mara Voss's father. A retired school custodian who had repaired the same building, Maeve refused to reopen. A young mechanic who had been helping neighbors secure their homes. A grandmother who kept spare medication in her purse for other residents. A husband and wife who had lived in Ridgefield for 22 years. Then came Colin Tolland. Maeve lowered her eyes. The final name was June Mercer. For the first time that morning, Maeve's face changed. Her mouth tightened. One hand closed around the edge of the table, as if she were trying to hold herself in place. June had not been a symbol when she died. She had not existed merely to complete Maeve's tragedy. She had been 72 years old. She grew tomatoes behind her kitchen. She remembered birthdays without writing them down. She drove neighbors to medical appointments and kept Ruth Tolland's photograph in a drawer beside her bed. June had spent more than 3 decades believing the frightened girl she rescued would one day become proof that mercy could outlive disaster. She had been wrong. Owen Pike sat several rows behind the victims' families. Months earlier, people had shouted his name with hatred. They believed he had ignored the order to open the shelter. His photograph had appeared on television beside the word failure. He lost his job, stopped answering his phone, and eventually left the county while investigators decided whether he would face charges. The records later showed that Owen had asked Maeve for authorization more than once. Maeve had altered the account afterward. The court cleared his name. It could not return the months when his parents were afraid to leave their house or the nights he woke believing 7 deaths had somehow become his identity. When the judge imposed 7 consecutive life sentences, Maeve did not speak. Additional years were added for falsifying records, obstructing the investigation, and abusing the authority of her office. Outside, reporters used words like monster, heartless, and beyond redemption. Maeve had heard versions of those words before. Not after Ridgefield. Long before it, they had followed her through school hallways and county offices, usually in softer forms. Difficult, unstable, controlling, too much. The girl who panicked when doors would not open. The woman who could not trust anyone else with a key. Those labels had wounded her because some part of her had spent a lifetime trying to prove the opposite. She had built shelters, organized bus routes, and trained volunteers. She had wanted her name to mean that no family would ever be left outside again. But pain did not make the verdict false. The judge did not sentence the abandoned child Maeve had once been. He sentenced the woman who had been given warnings, authority, and repeated chances to choose differently. When the deputies led her from the courtroom, Maeve turned once toward the benches. Owen did not look at her. The families did not ask for an apology. Nothing she could say would restore the people whose names had just been read. Somewhere beneath the noise of the courtroom, another sound returned to her. Wind against old church walls. Her mother's fist striking a basement door. A man on the other side saying there was no room. Maeve had been 10 years old when she first learned that a locked door could become a judgment on a human life. To understand what she later did with that lesson, the story had to return to Bellwether, Oklahoma, to the storm that took her mother and left Maeve alive. Before Maeve Tolland learned the language of emergency management, she learned the sounds of a house that could not protect the people inside it. The trailer where she lived with her mother and younger brother stood on the eastern edge of Bellwether, Oklahoma, close enough to the packing plant that some nights the air carried a metallic smell across the road. The roof leaked above the kitchen. One window never closed completely. During winter, Ruth Tolland pushed folded towels against the frame and told the children it was only temporary. Temporary was one of the words poor families used when they could not afford to say permanent. Ruth worked the late shift trimming and packaging meat. She came home with swollen hands and the exhaustion of someone who had spent 10 hours standing in cold rooms under hard light. She rarely complained in front of the children. When the electricity was almost shut off, she turned dinner into a candlelit picnic. When their father stopped calling, she said some people were better at leaving than explaining why. Maeve was old enough to understand that both statements were meant to keep Colin from being frightened. She was also old enough to know they were not entirely true. Storm season frightened her long before the disaster that defined her life. Bellwether tested its sirens every Wednesday at noon, and Maeve would stop whatever she was doing until the sound faded. At night, she watched weather reports from the floor because the television antenna worked best when she held the cable at a certain angle. Ruth never mocked her fear. She taught Maeve to count between lightning and thunder. She kept shoes beside the children's beds and important papers inside a plastic grocery bag. When the sky darkened, she gave Maeve a task. Fill 2 jars with water, find Colin's jacket, check the flashlight. The tasks helped. They turned fear into motion. Colin was 6, small for his age, and still convinced his sister understood everything. If Maeve said the storm was far away, he believed her. If she told him to crawl beneath the kitchen table, he obeyed without asking whether she was afraid too. That trust became the first form of power Maeve ever knew. On the afternoon Ruth died, the air felt wrong before the sirens began. The sky had a green-gray cast. The wind stopped. Even the loose sheet of metal behind the neighboring trailer went quiet. Ruth had been sleeping after a night shift when Maeve woke her and pointed toward the television. The warning named their side of the county. Their trailer had no storm cellar. Ruth pulled on her work shoes, wrapped Colin in a coat, and told Maeve to bring the plastic bag of documents. The nearest public shelter was in the basement of New Covenant Church, less than half a mile away. They reached it with several other families as the first rain began. Pastor Silas Grant stood inside the entrance with one hand on the door. He was a broad man with silver hair, and a voice people in Bellwether trusted, because it rarely sounded uncertain. He told Ruth the basement had reached capacity. Ruth looked past him. Maeve did too. There were open spaces along the back wall. Folding chairs held handbags and coats. Cases of bottled water had been stacked near a table where several members of the church board were waiting with their families. Maeve recognized them from local advertisements and school fundraisers. Ruth said she had 2 children. Silas answered that opening the shelter beyond its approved limit would put everyone inside at risk. He told her another location was available near the high school. The high school was more than a mile away. Ruth asked him to let the children in, even if she had to remain outside. Silas did not move. Maeve would remember that detail more clearly than the rain, the sirens, or the faces behind him. The man did not shout. He did not insult them. He simply kept one hand against the door and spoke as though procedure had made the decision for him. That calmness confused her for years. Cruelty was supposed to look angry. It was supposed to announce itself. Silas made it sound responsible. Ruth took the children back toward the road. By then, people were running in different directions. A neighbor opened a garage and called for Colin. Ruth pushed him toward the man, then pulled Maeve with her toward a drainage structure behind a row of houses. The wind erased every ordinary sound. Maeve later remembered losing her mother's hand. She remembered dirt against her face and the sensation of something heavy pressing across her legs. She did not remember how long she remained there. June Mercer found her after the storm had passed. June lived 3 trailers away and had known Ruth since both women worked at the same diner years earlier. She heard Maeve calling from beneath broken lumber and stayed with her until rescuers arrived. She covered Maeve with her own jacket and kept saying Colin was alive. Ruth was found later. The adults lowered their voices when they spoke near the children, but Maeve understood the meaning before anyone explained it. Colin asked when their mother was coming to June's house. Maeve told him soon because she could not bear to watch his face change. It was the first lie she told in order to keep control of a moment. The lie lasted less than an hour. Its effect lasted longer. In the days after the tornado, Bellwether rebuilt its public version of what had happened. News crews praised New Covenant Church for sheltering dozens of residents. Pastor Silas stood in front of a damaged stained glass window and said the staff had followed safety limits during an unprecedented emergency. He said one family had arrived after the basement was secured. Maeve watched the interview from June's living room. She told a county worker there had been empty room. The worker asked whether Maeve might have seen people moving after the door closed. Another adult suggested shock could make memories unreliable. No one called her a liar directly. They used gentler words. Confused, traumatized, overwhelmed. Each word moved her farther from the truth she knew. June believed her. That should have mattered more than it did. June filed complaints, contacted the church, and tried to find witnesses. But several people who had been inside said they had not seen Ruth at the entrance. Others claimed they could not remember. No record showed who had been admitted or when. The official report concluded that the shelter had operated within emergency guidelines. Maeve learned 2 lessons from that report. The first was that rules could be used to hide a choice. The second was that truth without authority could be treated like another symptom. June gave Maeve and Colin a bedroom, clean clothes, and a place at her table. She did everything kindness could do. Still, Maeve began checking the locks before bed. She counted the people in every room. She noticed who carried keys and who was allowed to speak without being questioned. She did not yet dream of running an emergency office. She only knew that she never wanted to stand outside while another person explained why the door could not open. And somewhere inside that promise, almost too small to notice, another belief began to grow. If Maeve ever held the key, no one would be able to make her powerless again. June Mercer's house was only 6 miles from the trailer park. But to Maeve, it felt like another country. The floors did not shake when trucks passed. The kitchen window closed all the way. A hallway closet held flashlights, canned food, and blankets because June believed preparation was a form of kindness, not fear. She never laughed when Maeve checked the weather before breakfast. She never told Colin to stop asking when their mother was coming home. But safety did not arrive all at once, simply because the walls were stronger. For months, Maeve slept in short stretches. She woke whenever the furnace clicked on or branches scraped the roof. She arranged her shoes beside the bed and kept Colin's coat folded over a chair. If the sky darkened, she counted batteries, checked windows, and asked June where the car keys were. June answered every question at first. Then she began asking one of her own. What do you think will happen if you do not check? Maeve had no clear answer. Failing to prepare simply felt like inviting punishment. Colin adapted differently. He returned to school, made friends, and stopped looking toward the driveway every evening. Maeve mistook his recovery for carelessness. She corrected what he packed for lunch, chose which roads he should walk, and made him repeat emergency instructions until he became irritated. One afternoon, Colin told her she was not his mother. Maeve struck the table hard enough to make both of them jump. She apologized immediately. Still, something shifted. Colin stopped telling her when he was afraid because he had learned that her fear could fill the entire room. June saw it too. She told Maeve that protecting someone was not the same as controlling them. Maeve listened and continued as before. At 12, she could not imagine love without vigilance. Ruth had been exhausted on the afternoon the warning came, and Maeve had begun to believe that disaster entered through moments when no one was watching. At school, teachers described Maeve as bright and difficult. She completed assignments early but challenged instructions she considered unsafe. She wanted to know which adult held the keys to each exit. She asked how many people the gym could legally hold and why one hallway door remained chained during after-school programs. Some teachers admired her seriousness. Others saw a child who made ordinary routines harder. Students gave her a name, Storm Girl. They said it when she paused beneath the weather radio in the main office. They whispered it when she refused to sit far from an exit. A boy once imitated a tornado siren behind her during lunch, and the table laughed when she dropped her tray. Maeve learned not to show fear again. The following spring, Bellwether Middle School held a severe weather drill. Students were supposed to move into reinforced interior corridors. Maeve had memorized the route. She knew which doors would be unlocked and which teachers had been assigned to each section. When her group reached the science wing, a fire door failed to release immediately. It opened after only a few seconds. For everyone else, the delay was an inconvenience. For Maeve, the hallway disappeared. She was back in the rain with Ruth beside her, and Colin pressed against her coat. She could hear an adult voice explaining why procedure mattered more than the people waiting outside. Before the teacher could calm her, Maeve shoved through the line, pulled at another exit, and knocked a metal cart into the wall. No one was injured. But the drill stopped, and students were returned to their classrooms. The assistant principal asked what had happened. Maeve could have said she panicked. Instead, she said Aaron Bell had secured the wrong latch. Aaron was a 19-year-old volunteer completing community service after a minor driving offense. He had checked the door that morning. Maeve had seen him do it correctly. She also knew he had stepped away shortly before the drill. Her answer gave the adults a simple explanation. Aaron denied locking anything incorrectly, but the school already considered him unreliable. The assistant principal removed him from the program pending review. The incident entered his service record, and the organization supervising him reassigned him to work that would not count toward the certification he hoped to earn. Maeve said nothing. June learned what happened when Aaron's aunt called the house. She waited until Colin was asleep before asking Maeve whether Aaron had caused the delay. Maeve stared at the pattern in the kitchen table. He wasn't there when it happened, she said. That is not what I asked. Maeve admitted she had not seen him secure the latch incorrectly. Her voice remained flat until June asked why she had named him. Then the anger came. If Maeve said she had panicked, the school counselor would write it down. A caseworker might decide June's home was not helping. Someone might separate her from Colin. Adults had already used words like traumatized and unstable when they wanted to dismiss what she remembered about the church. Aaron would be fine, she said. He was almost grown. He had family. He had made mistakes before. June did not raise her voice. She told Maeve that the truth did not become less important because the wrong person could survive the consequences. Maeve understood the sentence. She also rejected it. The next morning, June offered to take her to school. They could correct the report together. June promised Maeve would not be sent away, and Colin would remain with them. She would tell the administrators that Maeve's fear had been ignored for too long. Maeve put on her shoes. She followed June to the porch. Then she refused to enter the car. She pictured the assistant principal's expression when he realized she had lied. She imagined teachers speaking gently around her again, treating every true statement as evidence of illness. She imagined Colin hearing that his sister could not be trusted. Maeve told June she would deny everything if they went. June stood beside the car before returning inside. She did not abandon Maeve or threaten her. She simply looked older than she had the day before. That was the first time Maeve understood that a person could remain in your life and still lose faith in part of you. Aaron's reassignment became permanent. Months later, Maeve saw him stocking shelves at a grocery store. He recognized her but did not speak. She wanted to apologize. Instead, she moved to another aisle. The guilt did not disappear. it changed shape. Maeve told herself Aaron had already been marked by his own past, and that one more accusation had not decided his life. She told herself she had protected Colin and the only stable home they had left. Those explanations allowed her to sleep. They also taught her something dangerous. A lie did not need to feel good to be useful. It only needed to place the consequences somewhere else. Years later, Maeve would use more careful language. She would speak of staffing failures, authorization gaps, and incomplete communication. She would learn to hide personal choices inside official systems. But the first version of that habit began in June Mercer's kitchen, when a frightened girl was offered the chance to tell the truth and chose the safety of someone else taking the blame. By the time Maeve left Bellwether for college, she had learned how to look calm even when she was not. She earned a place in a public emergency management program 2 counties away. The campus was small, built around a converted technical school where classrooms smelled faintly of dust, old wiring, and coffee. Most students treated the program as a practical path into county work. Maeve treated it as proof that the life assigned to her could still be rewritten. She arrived early, sat near exits, and copied every procedure twice. She could recite shelter capacities, warning thresholds, and chain of command rules more accurately than students who had worked in local fire departments. Instructors praised her focus. Few noticed how deeply she distrusted any system she did not personally understand. Dr. Lenora Keene noticed. Lenora taught severe weather coordination and had spent years advising rural counties after storms exposed failures no one wanted documented. She recognized Maeve's ability immediately. She also recognized the danger beneath it. "You are always prepared," Lenora told her after class one afternoon. "But preparation is not the same as believing other people can carry weight with you." Maeve smiled as though she understood. She did not. During her second year, the program held a multi-county simulation. Students were assigned to a temporary command center and asked to respond to a fictional storm system moving across 3 jurisdictions. Maeve was responsible for coordinating incoming reports and sending verified updates to different teams. The exercise was designed to punish anyone who tried to do everything alone. Maeve did exactly that. She reviewed reports other students had already checked. She rewrote messages before allowing them to leave the room. When Ben Hall, another student on her team, offered to handle communications for one county, Maeve told him to wait until she had confirmed the numbers herself. Ben was capable but distracted. His father had been admitted to a hospital that morning, and he stepped into the hallway twice to answer calls from his sister. Maeve saw this. She also saw an opportunity to keep control without openly refusing help. Within 40 minutes, messages began to back up. One fictional community received its warning 11 minutes late. In a real event, those minutes could have mattered. In the simulation, no one was hurt. But the failure was serious enough to threaten Maeve's placement in a competitive state internship. Afterward, the supervising instructor asked why the information had stalled. Ben admitted he had briefly left his station. Maeve said nothing. The instructor concluded that Ben's absence had disrupted the chain. Maeve knew that was not true. The delay had begun before he stepped away because she had refused to release information without reviewing every line herself. She could have corrected the record with a single sentence. Instead, she allowed the silence to settle around him. Ben lost the internship recommendation. Maeve kept hers. This was not the same kind of mistake she had made as a child. No locked hallway had triggered panic. No one threatened to separate her from Colin. Maeve understood the system, understood the consequences, and understood that another person was being judged for her decision. She chose the version that protected her future. Lenora called her into an empty classroom the following morning. A copy of the simulation log lay on the desk between them. "The timestamps do not support the report," Lenora said. Maeve looked at the log and felt the old tightening in her chest. Not fear of weather. Fear of being exposed as less reliable than people believed. She admitted that she had held several messages for review, but she argued that Ben had been distracted, that someone had to maintain standards, and that the team might have failed in other ways if she had delegated more. Lenora listened without interrupting. Then she asked the question Maeve had spent years avoiding. "Did you know he was taking the blame for your decision?" Maeve answered yes. Lenora did not remove her from the program. She did something more difficult. She gave Maeve a choice. Maeve could submit a corrected report, accept formal discipline, and likely lose the internship. Or she could continue with the current record, knowing Lenora would no longer recommend her for leadership roles without reservation. Maeve asked whether Ben would regain his placement if she corrected the report. Lenora said there was a good chance. Maeve went back to her dorm and wrote a confession in a notebook. She described the moment she stopped trusting the team, the delay that followed, and the way she had let Ben's family crisis become a convenient explanation. She read it twice. Then she tore out the page and placed it in an envelope. The next morning, the envelope remained in her desk. Maeve told herself the internship would allow her to protect entire communities. Ben would find another opportunity. A single correction could destroy years of work while changing very little for him. The reasoning was cleaner than the truth. Weeks later, Ben withdrew from the program. He did not make a speech or accuse Maeve. He simply stopped attending. Maeve saw him once in the parking lot carrying a box of books. She almost crossed the pavement to apologize. Instead, she stood beside her car until he drove away. Lenora kept her promise. She did not expose Maeve, but her recommendations became careful. Maeve was described as disciplined, intelligent, and unusually committed. She was also described as needing stronger collaborative oversight. Maeve resented those words more than an accusation would have hurt. She believed Lenora had reduced everything good about her to one failure. She did not consider that Ben had lost an entire path because Maeve had protected herself from one consequence. Still, Lenora continued teaching her. She required Maeve to rotate command roles, document decisions, and allow others to approve outgoing information. For a time, the structure helped. Maeve learned the language of delegation and the appearance of shared authority. But she did not change the belief underneath. She still thought trust was something other people had to earn from her, while her own decisions deserved the benefit of the doubt. The incident with Ben should have taught Maeve that competence without honesty could become another form of danger. Instead, it taught her a more useful lesson. If she spoke carefully, kept her hands off the obvious lie, and allowed the system to reach the wrong conclusion on its own, she could protect herself without ever having to say something false aloud. Maeve returned to Dry Creek County with a state internship completed, a stack of certifications, and a reputation for working longer than anyone around her. The emergency management office occupied 2 rooms behind the county courthouse. Its maps were outdated. Several shelter agreements had expired. The radio system failed whenever storms crossed the eastern ridge, and the official list of public shelters included buildings that had not been inspected in years. Maeve saw the disorder and felt something close to purpose. She began at the bottom, answering phones, updating contact sheets, and driving through rural roads to verify addresses. She visited churches, schools, volunteer fire stations, and nursing homes. She discovered that some available shelters had stairs older residents could not climb. Others had locked side entrances, no backup power, or no one assigned to open them after business hours. For the first time, her distrust made her useful. She did not accept signatures as proof. She checked buildings herself. She asked who held the keys, where that person slept, and what would happen if the warning came at 2 in the morning. She persuaded the county to add a transportation list for residents without cars. She arranged for volunteer drivers to check on isolated households and insisted that mobile home communities receive printed evacuation routes. People who had once described Maeve as difficult began calling her thorough. June attended the first public meeting where Maeve presented the revised plan. Colin sat beside her, older now, broad-shouldered and still able to make his sister laugh when she forgot to be guarded. When the county approved 2 new shelters, June squeezed Maeve's hand beneath the table. "Ruth should have lived to see it," she said. The words hurt, but this time the pain did not turn into anger. Maeve looked at the maps on the wall and believed she had finally found a way to make grief useful. During her 3rd year in the office, a violent spring storm crossed the county after midnight. Power failed across Bellwether. One nursing facility lost part of its roof, and several roads became impassable. Maeve coordinated drivers, fire crews, and shelter volunteers through the night. She noticed that one bus had failed to check in and sent a second vehicle toward the route before anyone asked. By morning, every resident assigned to that bus had reached safety. Local television called it a miracle of preparation. Maeve rejected the word miracle. She said systems worked because people planned before panic began. The county promoted her. Soon afterward, Owen Pike applied for an entry-level planning position. He had grown up in Ridgefield, a mobile home community west of Bellwether, where storm warnings often arrived after the sirens were already sounding. Owen told Maeve that her work was the reason he had studied public safety. She hired him. At first, Maeve was the mentor Owen believed her to be. She took him into the field, taught him to distrust untested assumptions, and made him speak directly with residents instead of relying only on forms. She corrected him sharply, but defended him when other officials dismissed him as too young. Owen learned quickly. More importantly, he cared about the same communities Maeve claimed to serve. For several years, her life almost settled into something ordinary. She had Sunday dinners with June and Colin. She kept a small house near the courthouse and planted rosemary by the back steps because Ruth had once grown it in coffee cans. She allowed herself a few friends. She even began sleeping through light rain. The county came to depend on her. That dependence felt like gratitude at first. Then it began to feel like proof. When volunteers asked whether a decision could be made without her, Maeve heard doubt. When another coordinator suggested rotating overnight authority, Maeve said consistency was safer. She required final approval on public warnings, shelter changes, transportation lists, and press statements. The rules were not unreasonable individually. Together, they made the office move through her. Lenora noticed during an annual review. She praised the improvements but warned that no emergency system should rely on one person's judgment. Maeve answered that rural counties could not afford layers of management. Lenora reminded her that delegation was not bureaucracy. It was protection against exhaustion, error, and personal bias. Maeve agreed to create a deputy authority plan. She wrote the document. She never allowed anyone to use it. Owen once approved a minor route change while Maeve was attending a state conference. The change worked. Residents reached a shelter faster, and no resources were lost. Maeve reversed the policy when she returned. She told Owen that successful improvisation could still weaken command discipline. Owen apologized, though he did not fully understand what he had done wrong. Neither did Maeve. She believed she was protecting the system from confusion. Beneath that belief was something less professional. Each independent decision reminded her that the county might continue functioning without her. That possibility felt too much like erasure. June tried to name the change gently. At dinner one evening, she told Maeve that being needed by everyone was not the same as being loved by anyone. Maeve laughed and changed the subject. Colin said June had a point. Maeve asked whether either of them understood what happened when an emergency office made one careless mistake. The room became quiet. Maeve regretted the sharpness immediately. She apologized before leaving and sent June flowers the next morning. The apology was sincere. It did not change the structure she had created. By then, Dry Creek County had more shelters, better warnings, trained drivers, and clearer plans than it had ever possessed. Maeve had done real good. Families were safer because she had returned. But the system no longer simply carried her values. It carried her fear. She had spent years building something that could keep people from being abandoned. Without noticing when the change occurred, she began measuring its strength by how completely it depended on her. Maeve had become the woman who opened every door. She was also becoming the woman who believed no door should open without her permission. The first budget cut arrived in a white envelope marked routine. Dry Creek County had lost tax revenue after 2 factories reduced their shifts, and every department was told to submit a revised plan. For Maeve, the numbers were not abstract. They represented fuel for buses, inspection fees, backup batteries, and the hourly pay of people who opened shelters after dark. She spent 3 nights rebuilding the emergency budget line by line. When she finished, the system could survive, but only if the county approved a small increase in public safety funding. Evelyn Crowder, chair of the county commission, asked Maeve to meet privately before the vote. Evelyn was polished, practical, and skilled at making political demands sound like natural facts. She praised Maeve's work, then explained that the commission needed support from property owners in West Briar, the county's wealthiest subdivision. Those residents wanted a new reinforced shelter near their homes. Maeve pointed out that most houses in West Briar already had storm rooms or basements. Ridgefield had neither. Many of its residents depended on public transportation, and the old middle school nearby was their only realistic shelter. Evelyn did not dispute the facts. She said donors supported what they could see. If West Briar received the shelter, several business owners would back Maeve's budget. Without them, transportation funding might disappear across the entire county. The choice was presented as arithmetic. One underserved community could wait so that the larger system could remain intact. Maeve recognized the manipulation. She also recognized how easily she could explain it to herself. She approved the recommendation. Construction began near West Briar before summer. At the same time, a routine inspection found water damage in the old Ridgefield school. Maeve ordered its shelter closed until the building could be reviewed. The closure itself was justified. What followed was not. Owen examined the report and found that the damage was limited to storage rooms on the opposite side of the building. The reinforced interior corridor remained usable. A structural engineer estimated that temporary repairs and a restricted access plan could return the shelter to service within 3 weeks. Owen placed the documents on Maeve's desk. She read them carefully. Then, she told him the county could not afford another inspection until the next quarter. Owen reminded her that the new West Briar project had received supplemental funds. A small portion could cover the Ridgefield work without delaying construction. Maeve's expression changed. "Those funds are restricted," she said. They were not entirely restricted. Both of them knew it. Owen did not accuse her. He asked whether he should prepare an alternative request for the commission. Maeve told him no. For days afterward, the engineer's estimate remained in her inbox. She opened it several times. Each time, she imagined the commission meeting, Evelyn's disappointment, and the newspaper headline, "If the budget failed." She told herself that leadership required choosing the harm one could survive. Ridgefield residents could use the high school shelter across town. The route was longer, but not impossible. Volunteer drivers could compensate. The closure would be temporary. Every statement contained some truth. Together, they concealed the central fact. Maeve had decided that the community with the fewest options would be the easiest one to inconvenience. June Mercer came to the office after hearing about the delay. She did not arrive as an activist or an enemy. She carried a folder of names: older residents without cars, people using oxygen equipment, parents working night shifts, and families who could not reach the high school before a fast-moving storm. Maeve glanced at the list and said transportation plans were being updated. June asked when. Maeve answered that emergency management could not make decisions based on public pressure. June looked at her for a long moment. "Those are not pressure," she said. "Those are people." The sentence stayed with Maeve because it was too simple to argue against. Still, she argued. She explained the budget, the commission, the long-term value of political support, and the danger of weakening the entire system for one building. Her language was accurate and controlled. It also kept her from saying the words Ridgefield had been asked to wait because wealthier residents were more useful to the county. June listened until Maeve mentioned that no plan could eliminate every hardship. Then she asked whether New Covenant Church had once said the same thing. Maeve stood so quickly that her chair struck the wall. She told June never to use Ruth's death to question her commitment. She had spent years fixing what people like Silas Grant had broken. She had protected more families than anyone in that office before her. June did not deny it. That made the comparison hurt more. A week later, Colin called. His rent had increased, and he had moved with his wife and young daughter into Ridgefield. He tried to make the news sound temporary, but Maeve heard the embarrassment beneath his voice. She offered him money to move elsewhere. Colin refused. He said Ridgefield was not a place people should have to escape in order to deserve protection. Maeve accused him of repeating June's words. Colin said they were his own. The conversation remained quiet until Maeve asked whether he planned to attend a public meeting organized by residents. Colin said yes. Maeve told him the meeting would be used by her political opponents. If he stood beside the protesters, reporters would describe the dispute as a family conflict. Years of work could be reduced to a photograph of her brother accusing her of abandoning poor people. Colin asked whether the shelter should be open. Maeve did not answer directly. She spoke about inspections, funding cycles, liability, and the commission. Colin waded through every explanation. Then he said, "You know I am asking something simpler than that." Maeve ended the call. That night, she authorized an additional volunteer bus for Ridgefield. The decision lasted until morning. Evelyn called and warned that shifting resources before the commission vote could alarm West Briar donors. Maeve withdrew the authorization. No one forced her to do it. Evelyn had influence, but Maeve still controlled the operational plan. She could have documented the risk, requested emergency funds from the state, or publicly explained why Ridgefield required priority. Any of those choices might have cost her political support. None would have erased her authority. Maeve chose the option that preserved it. At the public meeting, Mara Voss stood with her father and asked why families in mobile homes were being sent farther away while a new shelter rose beside houses built to withstand storms. Maeve answered from behind a county seal. She said resources were allocated according to long-term regional needs. Mara asked whether need was being measured by danger or by influence. The room applauded. Maeve felt the sound as humiliation. She no longer saw a mother asking for equal protection. She saw a crowd threatening to dismantle the system she had built and hand it to people who did not understand the cost of keeping it alive. That was the moment the compromise changed inside her. At first, Ridgefield had been a community asked to wait for practical reasons. Now it became the place whose complaints endangered her work. Maeve had once believed authority was necessary to protect the powerless. She was beginning to believe the powerless were a threat to authority. Owen did not begin collecting evidence because he wanted to expose Maeve. He began because he still believed she would correct the problem if he placed the facts in front of her. For 6 weeks, he compared warning times, transportation records, shelter drills, and volunteer assignments across Dry Creek County. The pattern was not dramatic enough to appear in a single report. It emerged only when the records were placed side by side. West Briar received test alerts first. Its shelters had backup volunteers for every shift. Transportation requests were answered within minutes. Ridgefield waited longer. Its sirens were older. Its bus list contained phone numbers that had not been updated. 2 scheduled drills had been postponed and never rescheduled. Residents who called the county were often told to use the high school across town, even when no transportation had been confirmed. Owen prepared the findings quietly. He did not send them to the commission, the press, or the state. He carried the file into Maeve's office and closed the door. She read every page. For several minutes, she said nothing. Then she asked who else had seen it. Owen answered that no one had. Relief crossed her face before anger replaced it. She said the comparison ignored population density, road conditions, staffing shortages, and the new construction schedule. Owen agreed those factors mattered. He also pointed out that none of them explained why Ridgefield warnings were consistently delayed. Maeve told him to leave the file. The following morning, his access to county alert logs was removed. Maeve said the change was part of a routine security review. She reassigned Owen to inventory work, asked another coordinator to attend meetings in his place, and instructed staff not to release operational data without her approval. No formal accusation was made. That was what made the punishment effective. Colleagues began wondering whether Owen had mishandled confidential information. Volunteers who once called him directly were told to contact someone else. Maeve never said he was unstable or disloyal. She allowed the new restrictions to suggest it. Owen recognized the method because she had taught him how official silence could shape public belief. He asked for a private meeting. Maeve refused. A month later, a fast-moving storm crossed the western part of the county. Forecasts did not predict a major tornado, but the system carried high winds and the possibility of brief rotation. Ridgefield residents were instructed to use the high school shelter. The volunteer bus assigned to their area never arrived. The driver had been given an old route sheet. 2 addresses no longer existed, and the contact number for the route supervisor belonged to someone who had left the program months earlier. Families waited until the warning intensified, then searched for protection wherever they could find it. No one died. That fact became the center of Maeve's defense. A man who depended on portable oxygen spent the night in a crowded store basement after his family could not reach the high school. Mara Voss's father suffered a medical crisis during the confusion and required several days of hospital care. One family returned to find their mobile home beyond repair. Children who had been told the county had a plan learned that the plan did not include a working ride. Maeve described the event as a transportation failure during rapidly changing conditions. She did not mention that Owen had warned her about the outdated list. She did not mention that she had removed his access before he could correct it. At the internal review, Owen placed a copy of his earlier report on the table. Maeve said the document was incomplete and had never been formally approved. She suggested his decision to compile sensitive information outside his assigned duties had contributed to confusion. Owen stared at her. For years, he had believed Maeve's strictness came from fear of failure. In that room, he understood something worse. She was willing to make the system less safe, if safety required admitting that he had been right. After the meeting, Maeve found him in the hallway. She told him he had become too emotionally involved with Ridgefield because he had grown up there. She said public safety required distance. Owen answered that distance had become her word for not having to recognize the people affected by her decisions. Maeve warned him not to confuse personal loyalty with professional judgment. He almost laughed. "You are the one making loyalty part of the job," he said. The statement followed her for days. Mara organized another meeting at the Ridgefield Community Center. This time, Colin stood beside her. June sat in the front row with a notebook on her lap. Owen attended as a private citizen after work, careful not to present himself as a representative of the county. Maeve arrived with printed charts and a communications officer. Mara did not ask about budgets. She described the night her father waited for a bus that never came. She described the children crowded into rooms their families had chosen at the last minute. Then she asked whether the county would restore the school shelter before the next serious warning. Maeve answered that the review remained ongoing. June asked whether ongoing meant days, weeks, or another season. Maeve said she would not make operational decisions in response to emotional pressure. The room changed. Until then, many residents had been angry, but still believed Maeve could be persuaded. Her answer told them she had placed their fear in a category beneath evidence, even though they were describing the results of evidence she had ignored. Colin stood. He said their mother had spent her last minutes being told that rules prevented someone from helping her. Maeve's face hardened before he finished. She accused him of using Ruth to win applause. Colin answered that he was using Ruth because Maeve had spent her entire career using Ruth too. Maeve ended the meeting early. Back at the office, she drafted an order restoring Owen's access. She read it twice and pictured him finding more records, speaking with June, and presenting the pattern to the commission. She deleted the order. That was not a panicked decision. No storm was approaching. No superior was standing over her. Maeve had time to think, to sleep, and to reconsider. She chose retaliation again. She removed Owen from the next county-wide exercise and assigned his role to a less experienced employee who rarely questioned her. She also delayed approval for a volunteer training session in Ridgefield, explaining that the community's recent hostility created security concerns. The language made punishment resemble caution. Lenora called after hearing about the incident. She asked Maeve whether Ridgefield was receiving fewer resources because it was difficult to serve or because its residents had challenged her. Maeve said there was no difference if the conflict made operations harder. Lenora went quiet. Then she said, "There is a difference. One is a problem you solve. The other is a grudge." Maeve ended the call before Lenora could continue. That evening, she drove past the old school. Temporary fencing surrounded one side of the property. The damage had not spread. The reinforced corridor remained intact behind dark windows. Maeve knew the building could be returned to service. She also knew that reopening it now would validate Owen, June, Colin, and every resident who had accused her of allowing pride to shape policy. For most of her career, safety had been something Maeve tried to extend to people who lacked it. Now it had become something she could approve, delay, or withhold. The change did not happen in one dramatic moment. It happened through forms, access permissions, postponed drills, and explanations that sounded reasonable when separated from one another. Together, they revealed what Maeve was becoming. She no longer needed people to be safe in order to feel successful. She needed them to understand that safety still passed through her. The county commission scheduled the hearing for a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks before the start of peak tornado season. By 6 o'clock, every seat in the courthouse annex was filled. Ridgefield residents stood along the walls. Reporters had set up cameras near the entrance, and the room had gathered not to hear Maeve's plan but to question whether she should still be allowed to lead it. Maeve arrived with binders, maps, and the calm expression she had practiced for years. June Mercer arrived with nothing but a folded sheet of paper. When public testimony began, June did not discuss budgets or warning intervals. She spoke about Ruth. She described the woman who had worked nights, saved plastic containers for leftovers, and taught 2 frightened children how to count between lightning and thunder. Then she described the church basement where Ruth had asked for protection and been refused by a man who claimed procedure left him no choice. Maeve stared at the commission table. June's voice remained steady. Ruth did not die because one man controlled the weather, she said. She died after someone with authority decided that policy mattered more than the people standing in front of him. Then June looked directly at Maeve. You have spent your life saying that should never happen again, but Ridgefield has been waiting for you to prove you still mean it. The room was silent. Maeve did not hear concern in June's words. She heard exposure. The most private wound of her life had been placed into a public record by the woman who once protected it. June had not called Maeve cruel. She had done something worse. She had shown the distance between what Maeve claimed to be and what her decisions had become. Evelyn Crowder called for a recess before Maeve could respond. In a closed meeting, the commissioners offered her a path out. Maeve could take paid administrative leave through the storm season. A state support team, supervised by Lenora Keene, would temporarily assume operational control. The county would complete an independent audit of Ridgefield's warnings and transportation plans. If Maeve cooperated, the commission would describe the transition as a precaution, not an admission of wrongdoing. She would keep her salary and title until the review ended. Lenora told her the arrangement could protect the public and preserve the parts of the system Maeve had built well. She also understood that once another person sat in her chair, staff would discover how many decisions had been held in her office. Shelters might open without her approval. Owen's warnings might be validated. Ridgefield might receive the resources she had delayed. The county could learn that it did not need her as completely as she needed to be needed. Maeve asked for time to consider the offer. Owen found her later in an empty records room. He had brought a copy of his original report and a second file containing emails, delayed work orders, and access changes. He said he had not yet submitted everything to state investigators. Maeve asked whether that was a threat. Owen said it was the last chance he knew how to give her. If she accepted leave, reopened the Ridgefield School under state supervision, and restored the full record, he would state that she had cooperated before anyone was harmed by a major storm. He would not excuse what she had done, but he would acknowledge that she had stopped. Maeve looked at the young man who had once built his career around her example. You think you get to decide whether I am forgiven? No, Owen said. I think you still get to decide whether this becomes worse. The answer unsettled her because it contained no humiliation. He was not asking her to surrender to him. He was asking her to protect people she had promised to protect. For several seconds, Maeve wanted to agree. Then she imagined the headlines. She imagined Evelyn distancing herself, staff members reviewing old decisions, and June standing beside Ridgefield when the school reopened without Maeve. She asked Owen why he had attended the community meeting. He said the residents deserved to know someone inside the office had tried to warn her. That ended the conversation. Maeve told him he had violated professional boundaries and ordered him to leave the building. Colin came to her house that night. He brought food from June's kitchen and sat across from Maeve while she left it untouched. He told her to take the leave. Maeve said he did not understand what she would lose. Colin said he understood more than she thought. He had watched her turn a job into the only place where she allowed herself to feel safe. He had watched every disagreement become abandonment and every request for accountability become betrayal. Losing the office is not losing us, he said. Maeve asked whether that was still true after he stood beside June and Mara. Colin answered that loving her did not require helping her hurt other people. She looked away. This was the last clear moment when family, professional guidance, and evidence all pointed in the same direction. June had challenged her without abandoning her. Lenora had offered protection without deception. Owen had given her a way to stop before the damage became irreversible. Colin had promised that losing authority did not mean losing family. Maeve knew what the right choice was. The following morning, she declined administrative leave. She told Evelyn that transferring control weeks before storm season would create confusion and expose the county to liability. Evelyn, worried about her own political future, agreed to delay the vote for 10 days. Maeve then removed a preliminary audit memo from the commission packet. The memo documented that Ridgefield's shelter could be reopened under temporary restrictions and that county records showed repeated delays in service. She did not destroy it. She moved it into an internal file marked Incomplete Review, where commissioners were unlikely to see it before the vote. The distinction mattered to Maeve. It allowed her to say she had not erased anything. By the end of the week, she had retained command. Owen had been placed on administrative restriction, and the state team had been told its support was no longer required. A serious weather system was already forming west of Oklahoma. Maeve studied the forecast and convinced herself she needed only one clean response to prove everyone wrong. She did not understand that the real test had already taken place. It was not the storm approaching from the plains. It was the choice she had made while the weather was still calm. The storm system reached western Oklahoma shortly after sunset. At first, forecasts did not place Ridgefield in the most dangerous corridor. The strongest rotation appeared likely to pass north of Bellwether, and Maeve used that projection to confirm the county's existing plan. West Briar's new shelter opened early. The high school accepted residents from the eastern neighborhoods. The old Ridgefield school remained closed. Maeve sat at the center console of the emergency office, surrounded by radar screens and radio traffic. She had worked through nights like this before. The pressure usually made her sharper. This time, every update carried another meaning. If the storm passed without major damage, she believed the commission might reconsider the audit. Owen's report would look alarmist. June and Colin would have to admit that Maeve's judgment had protected everyone after all. She told herself she was thinking about public safety. She was also waiting to be proven right. At 9:17, Lenora Keene sent an update from the State Weather Center. The storm had shifted southeast. A new area of rotation was strengthening, and Ridgefield had moved into the projected path. Maeve read the message twice. Lenora followed it with a call. She said conditions were changing faster than expected. The old school could still serve as a temporary shelter if the reinforced corridor was opened immediately. A state team could assist, but Maeve had to authorize local access. Maeve said the building remained under restriction. Lenora reminded her that the preliminary audit allowed emergency use. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Maeve knew Lenora had seen the memo she had moved out of the commission packet. "I need a decision," Lenora said. Maeve answered that she would review the operational risk. Owen was still in the building under administrative restriction. He had no command authority, but he could see enough incoming data to understand what was happening. He entered the operations room carrying the school access list and the names of 6 volunteers already nearby. "We can open it in 10 minutes, he said. Maeve told him to return to his assigned room. Owen placed the list on her desk. "The high school is too far for half of Ridgefield now. The bus route is already behind." Maeve knew the volunteers. She had trained 2 of them herself. Opening the school would not require an improvised crowd, a new plan, or resources the county did not possess. It required her authorization. Maeve said activating an unapproved site during a changing storm could create confusion. Owen answered that leaving people without a reachable site was not safer because it had been written into the plan. The room went quiet. Maeve ordered security to escort him out. Before leaving, Owen said, "Do not make them pay because we were right." The sentence struck the exact place she had spent weeks defending. Calls began arriving from Ridgefield. Mara Voss reported that the high school bus had not reached the southern row of mobile homes. Another resident said cars were backing up along the county road. Dispatch asked whether the old school could be activated. Maeve repeated that it remained closed. Then Colin called. She did not answer the first time. He left a message. His voice was controlled, which frightened her more than panic would have. He said June was at the community center with Mara and several families. The road toward the high school was becoming difficult. They could reach the old school on foot, but they needed someone to let them inside. He did not accuse Maeve or mention Ruth. He said only, "Maeve, please. There are people here with nowhere else to go." She listened to the message from beginning to end. For one instant, the decision became simple. She could call dispatch, authorize access, and send the volunteers. She could accept whatever came afterward. Her hand moved toward the radio. Then, she imagined the school opening under Owen's plan. She imagined June standing inside, knowing public pressure had forced Maeve to reverse herself. She imagined the commission seeing proof that the shelter could have been available all along. If she changed the order now, the storm might pass without striking Ridgefield, and she would still lose authority. Every person who had challenged her would claim the reversal as evidence that she had endangered them for weeks. Maeve told herself late activation could place volunteers at risk. She told herself directing families toward an unofficial site might divide resources. She understood these were not the real reasons. The real reason was that opening the school required her to admit that June, Owen, Colin, and Ridgefield had been right. Maeve kept the order unchanged. 23 minutes later, Communication with parts of Ridgefield failed. The emergency office did not learn the full cost until after midnight. 7 people were dead. June Mercer was among them. So was Colin. Maeve remained at the console while names, addresses, and hospital destinations entered the system. Her staff moved around her, speaking quietly. Colin's message was still on her phone. She played it again. Regret arrived without ambiguity. Maeve did not wonder whether she had made the wrong choice. She knew, but knowledge did not make her honest. Owen's request for authorization had been recorded. The access list remained on her desk. If investigators saw both, the county would understand that the shelter had not remained closed because no one could open it. Maeve revised the first incident summary. She wrote that field personnel had failed to activate the alternate site before communications were lost. She removed the line noting that Owen had requested authorization and marked the decision chain as incomplete pending review. She did not write that he had refused an order. She created enough uncertainty for others to reach that conclusion. It was the same shelter she had used throughout her life. A version of events arranged to place the consequences somewhere else. By morning, Owen's name was already moving through the county. Maeve had crossed the final line when she left 7 people without safety. She crossed another when she decided one more innocent person could be sacrificed to protect the woman who had made that choice. For 11 days after the storm, Dry Creek County believed Owen Pike had failed Ridgefield. The first incident summary said field personnel had not activated the alternate shelter before communications collapsed. Owen's name appeared beside the incomplete decision chain. He was suspended before investigators interviewed him, and television crews waited outside his parents' house. Maeve did not publicly accuse him. She did not need to. She expressed sorrow, promised a complete review, and said no conclusion should be reached until all records were examined. The restraint made her appear responsible. It also allowed the county to continue reaching the conclusion she had prepared for it. Owen surrendered his work phone, access card, and copies of his notes. He told investigators that he had asked Maeve to open the school and had left a volunteer list on her desk. The official log did not show his request. For several days, the absence looked more powerful than his memory. Then, Lenora Keene found the first fracture in Maeve's version. The time recorded on the incident summary did not match the moment the State Weather Center sent its updated warning. Maeve's report suggested the county understood the change only after communication with Ridgefield had begun failing. Lenora's system showed that Maeve received the information more than 20 minutes earlier. Investigators recovered radio metadata, internal messages, and a draft audit memo from the file Maeve had marked incomplete. A security camera showed Owen entering the operations room with papers in his hand. His access record confirmed that he was escorted out minutes later. The volunteer list was found beneath a stack of weather reports on Maeve's desk. The final evidence came from her phone. Colin's message remained saved. It did not contain technical language or accusations. It contained a brother asking his sister to help people who had nowhere else to go. The timestamp proved Maeve heard him while there was still time to authorize the shelter. Once that message became public, the question was no longer whether Maeve had made the wrong forecast. It was whether she had understood the human cost and chosen not to act. Evelyn Crowder tried to protect herself by describing the financial pressure surrounding the county's shelter system. She admitted that donors had influenced construction priorities and that she had supported delaying the vote on Maeve's leave. But Evelyn had not been in the operations room. She had not ordered the Ridgefield school to remain closed after the storm changed direction. She had not heard Colin's message. The political system had rewarded Maeve's compromises. It had not made the final decision for her. At trial, the 7 people who died were not presented as a number. Mara Voss spoke about her father, Thomas, the retired school custodian who had repaired the old Ridgefield building for years. He knew which hallway had reinforced walls. He had once told neighbors that if the county ever reopened it, he would volunteer there. The young mechanic was Luis Ortega, who spent the early evening helping older residents secure loose property before trying to reach shelter himself. The grandmother was Patrice Holloway, who carried extra medication because 2 of her neighbors often forgot theirs during emergencies. The married couple were Warren and Elise Calder, who had lived in Ridgefield for 22 years and were saving to move closer to their daughter. Then there were Colin and June. The families refused to let either of them be reduced to parts of Maeve's biography. Colin was a husband, a father, and a man who had spent years trying to love his sister without surrendering his conscience. June was a neighbor, gardener, volunteer driver, and the person many frightened residents called before they called the county. Their lives had value before they became evidence against Maeve. Owen was cleared of wrongdoing, but exoneration did not restore the months he had lived as the county's chosen villain. He left Oklahoma after the trial. He later worked in public safety again, but never in a position where one person could control the complete record of a decision. The jury found Maeve guilty on 7 counts connected to the deaths, as well as falsifying public records, obstructing the investigation, and abusing her office. The judge imposed 7 consecutive life sentences, followed by additional prison terms for the cover-up. He said the sentence could not represent 7 lives accurately. No number of years could do that. Its purpose was to establish that public authority did not belong to the person holding it. It belonged to the people who depended on it. Ridgefield eventually received a new shelter. Its opening procedures required approval from several trained officials, and emergency access could not be blocked by a single administrator. Owen's original report became part of the county's training program. At the entrance, the community built a memorial bearing 7 names beneath the outline of an open doorway. Years later, during a recorded prison interview, Maeve admitted that she had heard Colin's message. She did not claim the storm confused her. She did not say she lacked time. She said she believed opening the school would prove everyone else had been right about her. The admission was honest. It was also useless to the dead. Maeve's childhood explained why authority, storms, and locked shelters carried such power inside her. It explained why losing control felt like becoming helpless again. But the child outside New Covenant Church had not sentenced Ridgefield. The adult at the operations desk had. Understanding where the darkness began does not mean forgiving what it became. Maeve spent her life promising that no family would be left without safety. In the end, 7 names remained because she decided that promise mattered less than the power to break it.